Fighter pilots internally aren't born with some great skill that other people don't have. It's something that is drilled into you by the repetition, preparation, and the training and how you approach things. Never master something typically on your own, out there flying an airplane solo, but you are never alone.
Kyle, welcome to the Point of Impact. So glad to have you here.
I am very happy, looking forward to our conversation today.
You are former fighter pilot. You've worked in big corporate aerospace startups. Got to run the experience length of the leadership field within the aerospace industry. Wrote the book on it, The Sky Less Traveled, and also own a bakery, which is kind of an outlier. And we're going to have to get to that. You talk about being a maverick, but it's all leadership, teamwork, all that. What does maverick mean to you?
The word, people get a kind of a conception of what a Maverick is based on obviously the movie Top Gun that came out and then Top Gun Maverick with Tom Cruise. But I look at it just a little bit different. A Maverick isn't a rebel. And in fact, what I talk about in the book is that no organization can succeed without having Mavericks within it. And a good leader is one who recognizes those Mavericks and doesn't keep them from being able to bring new ideas. And essentially, that's what a Maverick is. A Maverick is someone who's willing to challenge the status quo, who's willing to ask tough questions about doing things maybe a different way and questioning whether the way we're doing things is the right way or the best way or the most efficient way. So it's good to have Mavericks that can take a look at what you're doing and think a little bit differently and maybe even a lot differently out of the box and then challenge what's going on. And it's incumbent upon those Mavericks, though, and the leader, if it's a different person, to hear those ideas out and, when appropriate, to implement the change necessary to do the things to make a difference and to do it. On the other side of it, though, a Maverick who provides their idea, and maybe at that time the leader can't accept it, that's okay too. But when the leader does make a decision, that Maverick, needs to salute smartly and then fall in line with what the decision is going forward. And if you can't live with that, then instead of being a disruptor, once the decision is made, then maybe you need to go look for something else to do. So, and that's okay too, if you can't live with that decision. But really, for me, a Maverick is someone who challenges that status quo, isn't afraid to bring up new solutions to help improve the team, help improve the processes, uh, and create value.
You brought up Top Gun, which I wasn't going to do. I promise. But what was your call
My
sign?
call sign is Skitch, Skytch. And yeah, there's some long stories to how everyone gets named,
Okay.
but I was named back in the 1980s in my first fighter squadron, the 8th Fighter Squadron, the Black Sheep. So, every squadron has their own tradition with, in the Black Sheep, there was a guy who had this garish yellow coat that had a black sheep sewn on it that was from World War II from the squadron, and it had been passed down to the owner of the coat, and that person was responsible for working with everyone in the squadron to come up with call signs for people.
Okay. I know the movie didn't follow the same pattern. They just gave everybody cool guy call signs when I don't know if it's a uniform across all branches, but don't the Navy they actually get call signs based on embarrassing moments or
Yeah, it's
something along those
usually
lines.
something that you do, and by the way, you don't get a say in what your call sign is going to be. You can't accept it or decline it. You get what your peers decide is appropriate for you. Yeah, mine had to do with the same night I was named. There was another guy named Scar because he ended up getting a big scar face from falling onto the ground, and I happened to be able to hold on to the back of a pickup truck really well in the snow. And I guess on the East Coast they call that skitching. And with my name being SKY, then they said, "Hey, you can sketch," and I became Sketch. I At least I didn't become Scarface.
Who got the absolute worst? Or when was somebody just assigned? It was somebody who was just like phoning it in and got assigned something so mundane, like your name is Pilot today. But mine, by the way, on the EOD team was uh, was Shocker.
Shocker, nice.
But moving on, you I like to blow things up, but you talked about having a purpose-driven life, and there's three components to it. Can you tell me a little bit more about what those components are and how you came to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important that people find the life that is best for them, for themselves. And I found it took me a while to find that purpose in my life because I did things I thought for the right reasons, but they were really for other people's reasons. I was trying to make other people happy. And I wanted to do well in certain things. And it's not a
Mhm,
bad thing, but I wanted to do well and go to a good school for my parents. And I didn't want them to have to pay for college. So I worked hard to get into the Air Force Academy. I had no idea what the Air Force was or what I was getting into, but not that that was the wrong decision, but it was one that wasn't necessarily what I would have done on my own. I'm glad I did it in the end. Just things you do through your life for your spouse or your loved ones and for your children. Those are all important. But if you're always doing things for everybody else and you're not doing things that bring personal joy to yourself and then grow you as a person into the best that you can, I think you're not bringing your best self to the table for those that you do care about. You'll be a better son, you'll be a better husband, you'll be a better father when you find your own purpose and you do the very best that internally is for you, because now you're going to in the end be able to bring your best self every day to
mhm.
those that you care about. So that's what I talk about in finding a purpose driven life. And a lot of that is, people work very hard to make a lot of money, and that's really good. You need money to live. I don't begrudge anybody that, but if that's all you're going after, there's a lot of people that have a lot of money that aren't very happy. And people also say, well, I'm going to get something that I'm really good at. I'm going to be really good at it. I'll make a lot of money at it. But, again, there's a lot of successful people who are very good in their field, but they don't feel like they have this purpose. And so that's the third thing in there that's important that you kind of mentioned. And that's, you got to find something that motivates you and brings you joy, that you wake up to every day, that hey, yeah, I look forward to going to work. Because even with setbacks and when you're doing something that you really care about, those setbacks are just new challenges that you're eager to go solve versus something that you're not real motivated to do. Setbacks can be, very demotivating and make you question what you're doing. So if you are doing that, I recommend to people it's okay, even mid-career, at the start of your career, even late in life, it's never too late to go find those things that you're good at, you get compensated well for, but it's something you look forward to doing that brings you joy.
I've found that none of those happen at the same time. So, how does one develop their purpose-driven life? Which should they pursue first?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or does that entirely matter?
Well, I had that question asked to me once, what comes first, passion or purpose? And I think, those are good. That's a good question. And I think passion is needed because that's how you find the things that you're really motivated to do and it brings you joy. But passion's not enough. A lot of people have passion for things, but they don't do the things that they need to do to realize that passion by becoming good at what it is they do, that work very hard to find that thing that they're good at. But by the way, then they master that skill. They take the time to learn it. There's, so I think I think the passion may come first, but if you don't very quickly afterwards find your purpose as to why and how you're going to master that passion, then you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to tread water for a long time.
You were in single seat
Yes,
fighters,
yeah. I
correct?
flew the F-15C model, single seat, and then the F-16 as an Aggressor pilot, and then the FA-18 as an exchange pilot with the Navy for 3 years in operational flight tests. So all 3 were the single seat versions of those aircraft.
But you say you never soloed. What did flying in these single seat fighters teach you about teamwork?
Yeah, I mean, you're never out there alone. We never seldom ever flew alone. We always, at the minimum, flew as a 2 ship in an element, or the basic fighting unit was a 4 ship a flight, and then you would build those flights into 8, 16, however many more were needed for various missions. So it was always about the teamwork, and it was about not you individually and your fighter, but you as part of a team, part of a flight, and that you were just an extension of that flight, and that your wingmen were just as critical as you were in that. So, yeah, you were never alone because you always had a wingman to take care of, and you had a wingman that was going to take care of you. And also from the viewpoint that you never master something typically on your own. You stand on the shoulders of those that came before you. And as a single seat fighter pilot, I learned a lot in my younger years from that Vietnam era group that came before me, that went from F4s to F-15s, and they had their experiences from the Vietnam War, and I learned to become a fighter pilot from them. And then I grew from what my experiences were. And then it was incumbent upon me to now lift up that next generation of fighter pilots and leaders to stand on my shoulders and push them forward. And that was the beauty of it all. Because again, you may have been out there flying an airplane solo, but you were never alone. It was about your team, it was about your wingmen, it was about your squadron, it was about the mission.
Speaking of wingman, what does being a wingman teach you about leadership?
Well, I think the first thing is you can't be a leader until you know how to follow. And 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 that was a great segue there, because unless you understand what it is you're asking people to do and that you've been in those positions, I don't think you can be an effective leader. So it's not that a leader has to do everything or know how to do everything within their team, because that's sometimes, physically impossible. But a leader needs to understand what that purpose is, what that mission is, and then to understand how each of the roles fit. And I don't think you do that until you've been in all or some of those
And
roles,
being an
and where you can
aggressive fighter
appreciate
pilot,
what those
what
actions
did
are.
training against your own team teach you about leadership, failure, and life in general?
Yeah.
Perhaps exposing weakness before it becomes failure.
Yes. Yeah, I am.
Well, welcome back after that break from our sponsors. I don't know where we got cut off, but it was about 5 minutes ago.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Do you hear me okay? Yeah, it seems delayed
No, you
a little
cannot hear
bit,
me? Or yes,
unlike
you
the
can.
last time we were talking. Yes, I can hear you. How about me?
Yeah, but you say there's a lag?
It seems to be getting better now.
Hmm. I wonder why it's the same issue recurring. The same thing happened last time. Cut us off right
Yeah,
around
about 20 minutes
15
into it.
minutes or so.
Right. 50.
It's the strangest thing. It's the most unique bug I've encountered.
Yeah.
And I think we are still experiencing that lag. I don't I don't know. I'm baffled.
Would you like to continue on, and then just do you edit and splice in, or how would you like to go?
I don't even know if I don't know how I'm not sure I could juggle this lag. I don't know. I don't. We'll be talking over each other. I'm sorry, Kyle. I literally have no idea why only you have been experiencing this in my interview, but This is the only time this has happened. You're the only one, but I don't understand how it could happen multiple times across this. I don't know. Anyhow,
Yeah. But
I
it seems to be
appreciate your
doing pretty,
patience. Sorry.
but you don't want to, it seems like it's working pretty good right now. Do you want to try more or is,
Mm,
I mean, I don't,
okay. Well
whatever you
then,
suggest, sure.
okay. Then let's what was the last question I asked?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what was I talking about in there. I just closed off, I think,
Okay.
about
We'll start with you flew as an aggressive fighter pilot, training against your own team. Now, what did that kind of training expose you to, and what that teach you about exposing weakness before it becomes failure?
I think the Aggressor program, first off, was as a result because of the failures that they saw all the way back in the Vietnam War, and it started in 1972, and has stayed a part of the Air Force and even the Navy Air Forces since that time. What we learned is, if you practice against only what you do, it doesn't necessarily represent what you're going to face in an enemy or somebody who's challenging you. And so an elite group was put together, and I was lucky enough to become one that sole purpose was to study the adversary. And to study it in a different way that normal intelligence did. They were more into the numbers versus the numbers and what the missiles may have been like versus without really knowing what our missiles could do. And so we were able to look at that intelligence and then apply it in a way that made sense to us as the warfighter, and say, okay, this is they train differently than we do, so they're not necessarily making these kind of decisions here. They're doing it this way. So we, as aggressors, would replicate that and present that to our warfighters so that they could see something that would be different than that they would probably normally see if they were just training against themselves. So it was one of the great things that I got to do in my career. And again, it took me out of the mainstream. It took me out of my primary weapon system, but it exposed me to things that I would never have ever got to see in my life. So I got to meet with some very smart people who knew about what our potential enemies had and how they trained, and I was able to take that information and put it into terms then that our warfighters could use to better prepare. At the same time, when I was an aggressor, it was the end of the Cold War. And so it was in those years when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed and the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe collapsed. And so I was able to be on teams that went, first into Berlin when it was still divided, and saw what that looked like. And then all of a sudden, a year later, I was there again, and no wall. We were able to go to places that we only looked at before to see how well did we really know what our adversary or potential adversary was going to be. I also got to debrief and meet a whole bunch of different former Soviet and Warsaw Pact fighter pilots, some that were quite famous that wrote books, like Victor Belenko, who flew a MiG 25 into Japan back in the late 70s, Alexander Zuyev, who flew a MiG 29 from Turkey or from Moldova, which is part of the Soviet Union, into Turkey. And then also a very interesting one was a Cuban defector who flew his MiG 23 from Cuba and landed at Homestead Air Force Base in Florida, undetected, by the way. He just showed up in the traffic pattern, and everybody went, "Hey, what's this MiG doing here?" But was able to meet him, and learned a lot about those people and how they trained and what they thought. Uh, so while it was very exciting on the tactical side, I write in my book, in A Sky Less Traveled, about that experience. It also was very important as part of my growth as a person and how I judge people. Because, it's very easy to be black and white, good guys, bad guys. They're the bad guys, we're the good guys. When in reality, after I spent time with these individuals, guess what? They left a bad system too, and they could see that. They loved freedom just like I loved freedom. They wanted a better life for their families just like I wanted a better life for my family. And in the end, they were guys that I was training to fight against, but they weren't so different than me. So they were just raised in a different system, and they were, you know, they couldn't control where they were born. So, being an aggressor exposed me to that. And it helped me throughout the rest of my career, even when I left the Air Force, and realizing that, hey, you just can't judge people by labels and stereotypes, that you have to judge each individual because they could be even from within the same family, even, or in the same system or the same country. Everybody's an individual. We have our own thoughts, our own dreams, and you got to deal with people that
That
way.
must have been very interesting times, and actually very, I guess, interesting people to work with across the borders.
Yeah, it was, and if you would have asked me, I was just a kid from Wenatchee, Washington. I never flew in an airplane until I was a senior in high school to go leave, to join the Air Force. And 5 or 6 years later, I'm flying frontline fighters in the F-15, training against this threat. And those '80s and the Cold War was a big deal. I mean, it was the largest our military had been since World War II. It was growing fast, under the Reagan years. Every year we deployed, we had forward operating bases in Europe, waiting for, that Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union to come across the Fulda Gap. And it was a very different time. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate that anymore. It all kind of just went away all of a sudden. But seeing how that changed, and yet the people still being able to see people for who they are as individuals, and not necessarily as just, some conglomerate of bad people, really was it was changing for me. And I'm glad I got to experience.
What did your training and experiences teach you about staying calm when everything is going sideways?
Yeah, and I think that's part of just the way I thought the world was. And when I got into the civilian world, it wasn't that way when I went into the commercial world. And I think it was because of the rigor of what we just assumed everybody did as fighter pilots, is that you prepared, you planned, you prepared, you planned, you executed, you debriefed. And then from that debrief, you took the things that you learned and you put it back into your planning cycle and your prep cycle, and then you execute it again. And it was this constant preparation and readiness that made things seem just normal. Even the abstract, the difficult, it became normal just because you work so hard to do it all the time. And so I think, fighter pilots don't have some, internally aren't born with some great skill that other people don't have. I think it's something that is drilled into you by the repetition and the preparation and the training in how you approach things. And there was a study I write about in the book, but one of the things that came out about fighter pilots in general was that they're very compartmentalized, and they have the ability to focus intensely on the task at hand to the point where they can just close off, the other things that are going on around them or that are going on in their life. And I think, you may have experienced this in your profession as well. When you were in the military, you get into this flow state because it is so intense that you don't have time to have straight thoughts. You don't have time, you're so focused on what you've been trained to do and on handling the task at hand that you're able to get into that flow state and close off those things that can distract you. And I think that's the thing that great fighter pilots are able to do, is they can compartmentalize and focus on what they need to focus on. When it's something immediate, they focus on that immediate. If they can expand out and look with bigger situational awareness at the bigger picture around them, then they're able to do that. But then again, they know how to focus on that task that has the priority at the moment and give it the attention that it needs. And I think that's probably the thing that I learned best. And it's the thing that surprised me out in the, when I went out and was leading in the commercial world in the aerospace and defense business, is that, a lot of people didn't understand what that purpose was. And they just did tasks every day, not knowing how how it impacted or added value to what the team was doing. And then there was never any feedback to make them better. And then to, get into that cycle. And so people just didn't have that focus and that ability to compartmentalize and give their best to that task at hand. Now there are people who do that, obviously, and there are people who do great work, but it was amazing to see someone that was given mission focus, was given a process, was given a debrief cycle so they could improve what they were doing, to watch their improvement and watch how they had the ability to handle things that were up.
That fighter pilot cycle, the rhythm, you talk about the debrief. And it's a common factor in military, the special operations called the hot wash, the other areas of the military call AARs or after action reviews. What why is this reflection so important in not just career but in life in general?
Well, I mean, you become stagnant, right? If you're not trying to improve yourself, and you can't improve yourself unless you know what it is you need to improve. As a fighter pilot in a training mission, for instance, we'd go out and fly an hour and a half training mission. Before that mission happened, there was a briefing that occurred for 2 hours to go fly that hour and a half mission. And there was, sometimes many hours of preparation before that briefing by the flight lead who was going to lead it. But even more importantly, after that hour and a half mission, typically you would debrief for at least double the amount of time that you flew. So you would spend 3 hours debriefing that mission, going through every minute detail from the administrative standards for how you started engines to how you were lined up during taxi to how you took the runway and took off. I mean, even basic things like that. We talked and made sure that everybody was doing things to the standard, that they understood when things deviated, why did you deviate? Sometimes there's a reason for it. Sometimes there's not. Well, then follow the standard. Make sure that people know they're being held to that standard. And then during the fight, itself in the training fight, every detail was taped, communications, all the radar sensors and everything. And we would queue up these 4 TVs, for a flight of 4 with everybody's tapes synced to time. And you could see what everybody was seeing at the same time. And you would go through and see every step, every action, who did what, why did you do that, why did you miss this, what communication did you make, and why. And by asking those questions, you challenged what happened. And sometimes you found when you had a totally successful mission, and a lot of people in life, oh, well, I had a success, let's move on to the next one. Well, was your success really because of something you did, because of the way you prepared, or were you just lucky and your opponent or your competitor made a mistake that allowed you to win and you weren't really that good? So maybe there was something you need to change, even though you won. And then certainly on those ones you fail, sometimes you do everything right and it still just doesn't happen. And knowing that's okay too, saying, okay, the process was right. What we did was right. We just failed this time. And there's some things in there in that failure that you'll learn from and then you can adapt for next time. But, you know, success isn't always final and, failure isn't fatal. It's more about that ability to learn from that success, learn from that failure, and then to stand back up and try again. And I think that's the biggest thing that I learned and that I tried to apply to business life as well.
Why did you screw the pooch so bad on that last mission? I've never heard ever. Uh, what was it? You said success isn't final, failure isn't fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts.
Yep. And
Is
that's kind of, I
that
think, a quote that's attributed to Winston Churchill. I don't know if he really said it, but it's been attributed to him. But it's a great quote.
I? Yeah, they just stuck out from their last response. But you talk about change, your growth, learning, progression, and just about anything requires change. So why
Yes.
do some people repeat the same, keep making the same mistakes without learning?
Yeah. I write about that when my first, big corporation job. I'm a head of a flight test program, and about the third project finished, I went back in to quote the lessons learned briefing. And I sat there and, oh, by the way, the same lessons that we had talked about in the previous two lessons learned sessions were the same ones that were coming up again. And so, finally I said, okay, we know the lessons, but are we really learning them? Did we actually affect the change that allowed us to learn from these mistakes or these things that we did? And so it's a function of actually putting in the time and making a process that allows for that reflection if you're doing it in a business. And as a leader, you need to make sure that that becomes a part of your routine. And it doesn't take a lot of
Mhm.
time, but you need to do it. And then not just enough to point out what went wrong or what needs to be fixed, but then actually having a process for rewriting your your manuals or your processes and training program so that people know, the new people coming in know not to repeat those mistakes. But it takes effort. And a lot of people don't want to do that ever. They just want to move on to the next thing. And a lot of companies operate that way. But individually, I think, the way that I kind of term it is that there's three things that people kind of focus on in their lives. And some of them focus on the past and things that went wrong in their past, or even successes they had in their past. They just can't let go of it. And that past defines them for the rest of their life. And they can't change because they can't let that past go. They can't learn the lessons from them, adapt it, and then say, you know what, I can't change it. I can just let it go and I'm going to move forward. You stay stuck in that past and you can't let it go. That past defines you. And you become that, pretty much the rest of your life. Then there's other people who are very future focused. They have goals 20, 30, 40 years out there, and they're going to go get those goals. And they're so
Mhm.
focused on this thing that may not even be in their control that every decision they make is focused on something that may or may not happen way out in the future. I think it's great to have goals, and you need to know where you're going or where you would like to go, but it should be a guide and not the narrow path that you can't deviate from. And then there's the people who I think are very well balanced. They learn from the past, let it go. They have a direction they want to go, but they live in the moment today, and they're
Mhm.
able to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm trying to get to this place, but here's a new opportunity just presented itself. You know what? This is something that's interesting to me. I'm going to deviate a little bit off that path." And I'm going to go try it. And I may find a new goal that I want, or it may help me become better to reach that goal that I'm trying to do, but they're not afraid to take some of those chances and live today and take the opportunities that come to them.
You talk about learning from mistakes, and sometimes assigning blame. But you say an effective leader has to ask three questions before assigning the blame. What are those?
Yeah, I made it a point because I did it for myself when I was the leader of a team, and then I made sure all of my supervisors or managers did the same for themselves. But it's so easy, and you see it so often where people just immediately going to point the finger at someone and say, "You made a mistake. It's your fault." Well, that person may have truly made that mistake, but is it really their fault? And so I would always say, and I'd ask myself, I had a responsibility as a leader. I mean, the number one responsibility for a leader is service, right? So you have to serve your team. You got to put them in a position to succeed. And in order to do that, when things were going off the tracks, I would ask myself first, was the end state clearly defined? Did they know what success looked like? Did they know what the job really was? Did I explain in enough detail and give a definition as to what success was that they knew what they were working towards and why? If they didn't, then that's on you as a leader that you need to look inward and say, wow, why didn't I clearly define the task was and what success looks like? The second part is, okay, they may know what that task is and they know what success is, but if you don't give them the resources to accomplishment, how many times have you been on a team, that's been asked to, oh, go do this, and you go, well, we need a budget of this, and you get half of that. Well, guess what? You can't do a full budget's worth of work on a half, and so if you don't give them the resources, or hey, we need 2 months to get this done. Well, you get 3 weeks. Sometimes you want to push your team and do that, but oftentimes it's impossible. And so if you've not given the resources, be it budget, time, tool, uh, that they need, the equipment or whatever it's going to be, then that's on you as a leader. You ask them to do something that's impossible for the resources that we're given. I think we should challenge ourselves. We should always try to do it better and with less resources if possible, so that especially in business, so you can be more profitable. But at the same time, you can't ask for the impossible. So you got to find that balance. And then the final one is, did you ask too much of your team? Again, you want to challenge people. Sometimes you want to challenge them to do something they've never done, but are they in a place where they can do that new thing? Did you give them the training they needed to be prepared for that? Did you give them the mentoring or the guidance and the oversight they needed along the way to make sure they stayed on track for this thing that maybe was totally new to them? So to me, those were the three big things I always ask myself. And I always ask, in a debrief, especially if you stand up as a leader and you point out those things yourself. Hey, guess what, team? This is what I found that I didn't do for you in this project. Immediately, everybody starts to open up and they're like, oh, man, the old man's pointing the finger at himself, taking some of the responsibility and accountability for this. And they become more open and they realize that this debrief or this after action report or session it's not about pointing fingers and blame. It's about truly how do we become better and how do we make things better for ourselves. And that's when you start getting a high functioning team.
When you asked that last question, did I ask too much of my team? I was thinking of Steve Jobs, the reality distortion field, or Elon Musk, who just has the practice of asking impossible goals, encouraging, providing enough resources, and then threatening with replacement. So you can ask for lofty goals. I think that asking for too much, it's relative, but you have to
Yes.
have a clear
Yeah.
definition of what your team is capable of.
Yeah, and I think that's where a great leader steps up. They understand that. They understand, okay, this team's underperforming. I can get more out of them. And they do the things in a way that motivates them to want to do more, and you can do that. But that you do reach a limit where, if you don't understand what it is you're doing, if you don't have the resources to get there, I can sit here and say I want to go to the moon, but I don't have the resources to go to the moon. So yeah, it's a great goal, and I can have a clear definition, but I don't have the resources. I'm not going to get there. So you know to be realistic. Yeah, to your point, that is very true. One thing about SpaceX though that's cool is that it's something like NASA never had, and that was, hey, this is an iterative thing, and we're going to have failures, and failures okay. Rockets are going to blow up as long as they're the unmanned ones early on, and we build ourselves that way. We do rapid iteration, and we learn and improve, and we get better and better and better, and pretty soon we have a reusable, safe rocket that we can get a lot of people up into space in a hurry with. So um, that's also a different approach that people were, hey, it's okay. This test is to try something new. And if the rocket blows up, that's okay. We learn from it. We make those changes. We go on to the next one. And that's that process. And I think SpaceX was one company that demonstrated that tremendously. And look where they're at today.
With Edison, light bulbs must have been cheaper than rockets. That in finding all the different ways it didn't work. But what do they call it at SpaceX? Instantaneous remote disassembly.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. So I'm not a space guy. I'm a fighter pilot guy, but I do have some friends that were astronauts and in that world, and it's interesting to talk with them. But no, I'm not. And the engineering side, don't get me there.
Talking about failure and just when the pressure is on. What's the difference between managing when things are going right and leading when things are going wrong?
Yeah, I write a chapter in there about leadership versus management, and I say there's clearly a difference between leadership and management. They're two different functions. but they're both necessary and they're complementary. And I just as a simple line, I would say you manage when things are going right and you lead when things are going wrong. And so in a nutshell, what does that mean? Well, you need leaders to provide the vision and the strategy. You need leaders to provide the motivation. You need leaders who are going to challenge and implement, challenge the status quo and implement change to help an organization move forward. But none of that can happen unless you have good management. Management is about systems and processes and being the best, most efficient you can be, to get things done. So a leader may have the strategy and vision, but it's management that provides for the execution. Just because you got a vision and a strategy doesn't mean you're going to be able to get there unless you have somebody who can put the execution together. Uh, Same thing with motivation. I could stand up there all day long and give pep talks and try to motivate people to do things, but management actually provides them the tools and the processes to be able to get those things done, once they're motivated to do it. So you need to have that as well. So, some people can do both. Some people are tremendous leaders and they're really good managers. They can put together the systems and processes. Others are very good managers, but they can't lead. They're good at knowing how to build whatever process and how to execute and get a team to have a smooth process and a smooth production line or whatever that may be. But they don't necessarily motivate and lead and understand how to build a strategy around that. And then there's some people who are great leaders, but they're horrible managers. So understanding what you are as an individual is very important. And just because, you may be a great manager, but now doesn't mean you can't learn. And it doesn't mean you can't step up. And I like to say that, management or manager positions are on an org chart. You look out and it says, it's the manager of this or the director of that, vice president. Those are management positions. A leader can be anywhere in an organization, and it should be, and hopefully is, the very top of the organization. And at those management levels, that would be great. But sometimes, leadership is embedded throughout the organization and within small teams. And I always encourage people that, you may not be in a management position, but doesn't mean you can't be a leader. It doesn't mean you can't lead your team, and you can't lead up and put your manager into a position where they succeed because of what you're doing as a leader within that team. And that gets recognized. And that's how people, get movement and promotions or recognition or whatever it is that they're looking for compensation. That's how you do it, by taking those opportunities to lead, no matter where you are in the organization, and being a leader when it's necessary. And so, yeah, to me, they're very different things, leaders and managers, but you got to have both.
You've described leadership as service. What does it really look like to serve the team and the mission?
Yeah, I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say, "Oh, look at, I just got promoted to this position," or I'm the boss, I'm the one in the lead." They make the position and the leadership and the success about themselves, and it's really not. A good leader, to me, or a great leader, is one who doesn't need the credit, and they don't take the credit. They're the ones who recognize that they couldn't have got to where they are without their team. And so their job really is, it's not about them succeeding, it's about putting their team in a position to succeed and being able to understand the strengths and weaknesses of all the team members, and then, making sure that the weaknesses get addressed so that they don't become weaknesses anymore and they become strengths, or to be able to not put them in a position where their weaknesses will be exposed. That's what a good leader is. It's about serving the team so that the team is successful and that each of the team members have success. And when they do, then that whole team has success and it reflects well upon everybody. And they all feel a part of it. I mean, face it, most people aren't asking for a whole lot in their lives other than to feel like what they do is important and has meaning to something bigger than themselves. And to me, that's what great leaders do. They get their teammates and their teams and their organizations to realize that what they're doing has value and that it's important, and they're a part of something bigger than themselves. And that's a great motivator. And to me, that's what leadership is all about. It's finding that ability to serve the people that are on the team, to serve the mission in what you're trying to accomplish, and then setting people up for success.
That's leadership at all levels. So, what what's that? What's this snack officer lesson?
The snacko. Yeah, the story is, every fighter squadron had a squadron bar. Has rich history and tradition. We would have stuff, a lot of squadrons from World War I or World War II, and you would have a history and some pictures or books that would talk about that stuff. So, the fighter bar just wasn't a place to go, socialize or to go drink. It was a place where we shared, a common history, where we shared the uniqueness of what we were, which for not very many people in the world get to go fly fighter jets, and it was a place where we could bond as a team. So it was very important that the squadron bar, was set up properly. And so typically what the squadrons would do is that the youngest, newest lieutenant, who was, the newest combat ready fighter pilot in the squadron, would become the snack officer, or in a short term called the snacko. And their job was to make sure that, the kegs were full, the whiskey was on the wall, the sodas were in the fridge. Usually we had like a popcorn machine, and we would put jalapenos and jalapeno sauce in there to make it nice hot popcorn. But all of that was stocked. All of it was cleaned and ready. The squadron mugs. So each individual guy had a mug with the squadron logo and or patch and your call sign on it. So your mugs were on the wall. Your name tags would be up there, so you could see everyone who was in the squadron. And a lot of them had name tags from all the way back to the past. They would turn upside down when somebody passed on. So it was a great place of recognition. So when things didn't go right, it was noticed. And the SNACO wasn't an official position, so it wasn't anything that was written into your annual report, officer report, or anything like that. It was an informal position, but it was one that carried a lot of weight. And there was a lot of guys who did really well in that position, and they got, people recognized them for that, and then started saying, you know what, these guys look out for their teammates. They may not get a lot of notice, but you know what, they care and they want it to work for everybody else. And that would often lead, assuming that they could fly, they had a modicum of skill flying the aircraft, that they would get opportunities because they showed that they were willing to do that dirty work or the hard job that nobody else wanted when nobody else was looking. They didn't need attention, but they just wanted to make sure that they were doing the right thing for the right reasons. And so, yeah, I mean, the SNACO, very important part of the squadron, even though a lot of people might have said, hey, this is beneath me, man. I'm a fighter pilot now, and here I am stocking a bar and cleaning it up. And you know what? But a lot went on in that bar about learning to be fighter pilots. And when it was done right, that's where we bonded as a team.
I think one of my friends is the Snacko. In fact, he mentioned in a post, he's a guardsman who was activated and sharing posts about the same thing, the popcorn machine and some extremely punishing hot spices. So that's, I guess that's a commonality. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I was just saying, yeah, it's pretty common to all the fighter bars. They're a great place.
We actually had we had a popcorn maker in the EOD tent in Afghanistan. I think it was fantastic. But I also, I guess, this self-appointed officer built a mud-packed, what was it, a clay, like an Afghan moon dust, sun-baked brick pizza oven out back, and started baking fresh bread for guys in the talk.
Yeah, and it goes a long way in building camaraderie and people appreciating you and understanding, hey, this is a guy who's willing to do stuff for the team, even when it's not necessary or part of the job. And yeah, that goes a long way in making winning teams.
Do you make important decisions when the the clock is short and the pressure's on?
Yeah, the important thing is that any decision at any time, you're never going to have all the information that you would like to have, right? That paralyzes some people. They, oh, I need more time. I need this piece of information. But there comes a time when you got to make a decision with the information you have. The best decision that you can do now. It kind of goes back to the George Patton quote, that something to the effect of, an okay plan violently executed right now is better than a perfect plan that is a couple days late. And so sometimes you just got to go with what you have, but then you also realize, one of my quotes that I've learned over the years is that a plan is just a starting point for deviation, because nothing ever truly stays the way that you think it's going to stay. So, the idea being is you have a plan, so you know where you're starting from, but as things change, you got to have the ability to adapt and to flex and to be flexible and have trained for that so that you're ready to go in a different direction when you need to. And I think that's the biggest thing is yes, planning's important, preparation's important, but also understanding contingencies, having training for what to do during abnormal procedures or when things aren't quite there that you can fall back on things that you could do instead of having to make them up on the spot. So it's kind of proactive planning in my book versus reactive planning. And so if you're ever in a position where you're just reacting and it's something new to you, then you probably didn't prepare and understand what all the contingencies could have been. So, I mean, you don't always get them all, but if you're comfortable knowing that, hey, you know what, things can go wrong and that's okay because I have things I can fall back on, that's usually when you're going to have better success.
You wrote in your book about resilience being focusing with the keys being focusing on the process rather than the failures. Sorry, not wins and losses. So how should people think about failure?
Well, I think everybody's failed. I don't know a human being that quote doesn't have a failure at some point in their life, or they've lost, they didn't win. I don't know anybody who's been on any team or in any individual sport where they've been undefeated their entire life. So when you lose or you fail at something, it doesn't make you a loser or a failure. You only become that if you decide that's what you're going to be and you don't do anything about it and you just accept that loss or that failure. If you fail, you're just another person who failed. And if you think about it in life or business or sports, for every winner, there's at least one loser. In some contracts, there could be 5 or 6 losers. It doesn't mean all those companies are losers, just meant one won. And so people who focus only on the wins and losses, I think, it becomes short-sighted. And also if you're only looking for success and then you get that success and that's what you were all about, well, now what? You don't really have a plan or a process for, how you're going to proceed next. So yeah, so I think it's very important. It's less worrying about the win and the loss or the success or the failure than it was, did you do the right things, put you in the position to succeed or fail? And then again, sometimes like we mentioned earlier, a lot of that's out of your control and things may happen and you may not have that success or you may not win. But if you go back in that debrief process and you said, you know what, we did pretty well and these are the things that happened, what can we do next time maybe to change it a little bit? Fine. But our process is right. And we go attack it and we'll try again versus, a lot of teams, like I said before, win. Hey, we won. Well, now what? What's your next goal? You're always just chasing the next win. And that after a while, that becomes, I don't know, it's not as fulfilling as knowing that, hey, I'm doing things right and I'm doing things right for the right reason. And the wins will take care of themselves at that point. I mean, does that make sense? I
If
guess
at
I was
first
trying to do that. Yeah.
if at first you don't succeed, the world needs sweepers.
Ain't that the truth?
So we're getting a little bit long on time here, and it's but before we start to wrap up, tell me about this bakery.
Well, when I got out of the Air Force, I just needed some time to decompress a little bit, I guess, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to go do in the civilian life when I went. So I had the opportunity to move back to my hometown in Wenatchee, Washington, And during my travels in the Air Force, I'd always appreciated these Great Harvest Bread Company bakeries, and thought, well, with my ex-wife now, but with her, we opened up a franchise and I became an entrepreneur. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make money on my own here. And I put food on the table based on my own success. This is good for me to learn. And it was a good experience. Not that baking was my passion, but it was good for me to get and focus my attention on something different than what I'd been doing for the previous 27 years, and in addition to that, I also was one of the co-owners for a professional indoor football league team. So, I was Jerry Jones on a small scale, president of this Wenatchee Valley Venom football team that played in a indoor arena in our hometown. And so those were good experiences for me in that I learned about small business. I learned about having to make decisions for yourself and build your own processes and your own teams, because when you're in the military, that structure is there. You're just stepping into something that people have already done. But now doing it on your own was a good experience for me. But after that, I decided I needed to get back to flight test, and that's when I went to Raytheon as a test pilot, and then also as the senior manager for their flight test programs down in Los Angeles.
Fresh bread and football. So we'll get into the segue into the final segment, the countdown to impact, and that's three books, two quotes, and one person who have all made an impact in your life.
3 books. So these aren't all books that I've recently read. They're books at different phases of my life that had impact. And so I chose these for a purpose. I mean, I do like to read for entertainment, but these books helped me define some of the things that I wrote about and how I try to live my life. And the first one it's called 4,000 Week: Time Management for Mortals. And it's by Oliver Berkman. And that book is great because if you think about it, if you live a normal lifespan, you get 4,000 weeks. When you put it in those terms, you go, holy cow, that maybe I'm not here. And that's not guaranteed, right? So you don't even know that you're going to get those 4,000 weeks. I'm lucky and get to have more. But in that book, it goes about talking about finding purpose. With that, a limited amount of time, why do we waste so much time on things that just don't matter? Having to empty all your email box when 90% of those emails are worthless and junk. Doing things just to keep busy because you think you got to have a full schedule, when really there's one or two or maybe three things a day that are really important to get accomplished. Not many people on their deathbed said, boy, I wish I would have made more money. But a lot of them say, gosh, I wish I would have spent more time with the people I love. Well, maybe you should figure out how to do that. So that book was very good for me. And then the other one, and partly because when I met him in 1984, and he was at my graduation from the Air Force Academy, but Ronald Reagan kind of gave me a great philosophy for how I try to live my life from that time in the academy. And so he has a book called Reagan in His Own Hand. And they are writings of Ronald Reagan that were found in the presidential library uh, years and years after he was president, I think even after his death. And then they found these handwritten notes that he had used when he was on this radio talk show in between the time he was governor of California and president of the United States. And you found out that, boy, he really did have a revolutionary vision for America. And it was, he wasn't speaking other people's words. These were his words. These were his thoughts. And, the book even had the lines that he crossed out, and, you could see his thoughts and his editing and how he came up with the things that he believed in and the logic behind it. And it taught me that, it's not enough just to believe in things, but you got to have the basis for why you believe in it. And then you're willing to change if you find out that maybe some of the things you thought weren't accurate, and you have the ability to adapt. And I thought that book was very good for that. And then the last one was from the early 1990s, actually may have been late 80s, but early 90s. I read it, called The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler. And that one was important because we're kind of living through it again now, but it was the world changing from the industrial revolution that we all grew up, and everything was about manufacturing and massification. They're stamping out the same car, and guess what? We all got the same white car, But boy, you could get cars when you didn't have before. To hey, we're in an age now with computing technology and everything else where people want to have things personalized. And how do we, in this info center world, how do we go from this massification where one stamp fits, one thing fits all, even in education, public schools were all built about everybody goes for the same reason. He was like, no, we have the means now, and we should start looking at this. Was 30 years ago, and it's even better, more so today with AI and the other things out there. But how do we personalize each of these things? And we have the means to do that now. And so people who don't jump on that bandwagon and figure out that you can't force people to do what they don't want to do, that you need to be able to adapt and tailor things and personalize them to the needs of each consumer or each person. Those are the people who are going to succeed in this new wave that's going on. So those are my 3 books. And then I guess my 2 quotes, and one of them we already talked about today. So success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. That's attributed again to Winston Churchill. So I think we talked about that. And then the other one, I grew up with sports. I love sports my whole life. I loved UCLA basketball when John Wooden was the coach. But that head coach, famous Hall of Fame coach John Wooden, said, be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are. And I think that's an important thing in life. And again, I think about being a Maverick and finding your own purpose is that it comes from inside, and it's your own character, and it's not your reputation. It's not what other people think or expect from you. It's what you do that is right, and you do it for the right reasons. And I think that quote to me really resonates, and try to define how I live my life, and how I judge myself. So I know you said one person, and I said, a big macro scale for someone I just briefly met, but I think Ronald Reagan was important in that regard for me, kind of as a historical figure. And I will combine my parents as the other 2, and I give them a lot of credit in the book. They were a couple that were married at 16 years old in high school. Had their first child when they were 16. They had 6 of us by the time they were 29. I never once in my life felt that I was without, but then I look back at it now, and it was a high school teacher salary trying to raise 6 kids, 8 of us in the house. You know, a big trip was driving somewhere in the family station wagon, and never had all those things that I thought everybody had to have, but never felt like I was without. They made it seem easy, and I know it couldn't have been. And so I admire them for that, and I'm thankful to them for that life. And then finally, the one that's helped me gain perspective in life was my best friend and squadron mate in the Aggressors, who during a red flag exercise impacted the ground. I write about it in The Sky Less Traveled, but died at 30 years old. Great fighter pilot, great friend, just a lot of fun to be around. But Jim Malibu Reynolds, and he looked just like a guy off the beach of California. All the women loved him. Single guy that lived life. He lived life for every moment up to the day he died. And it made me realize that, it can happen to all of us, no matter how good you are or how safe you feel. You don't know what life's going to throw you, and it can all be taken away in a moment. So live that life with purpose, find your purpose, and then live it purposefully every day. And so I think those were sorry, I used 3, but those were probably the people that have influenced me the most.
I'm sorry, this is a podcast, not your book dedication. So I'm going to have to throw that entire answer out. All right. Thank you very much, Sketch. Final 2 questions. One, where can people find out more? Maybe pick up the book.
Yeah, I have a website called wildsky-consulting.com. Wild Sky is my management consulting company. It's WYLDSKY consulting.com. And on there, you can contact me about keynote speaking, about consulting or leadership coaching if you need that for your teams. I am here to help in that regard. My book, A Sky Less Traveled, A Maverick Life of Leadership, Resilience, and the Pursuit of Purpose is available on Amazon. So you can look up A Sky Less Traveled or Kyle Skalisky and should be able to find the book on Amazon. It is coming out in audiobook in hopefully June or July of 2026 this summer. So it will be on Audible, Spotify, all the places where you can find audiobooks as well. So A Sky Less Traveled. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk to people about what they think of the book, to talk to them about helping them build winning teams and how to be a leader.
Kyle, thank you very much for your time. The last question is, what's your definition of leading a life of impact?
Well, I think leading a life of impact is again about service to that which is important to you. I hate the word legacy because legacy is to me about historical figures, and which are only a handful really, that anyone really remembers over time. Most of us in 100 years from now, no one's going to remember our name. So quit worrying about what people are going to think about you when you're gone, and be more worried about what the people you can influence today think about you and that you can do for them. And to me, that's leading a life of impact. And it's not about, worrying what people think about you when you're gone. It's what you can do right now, what you can do today, what you can do in this moment, what you can do today, what you can do tomorrow, and leave a lasting impression. Even if people don't remember it was you, I can look back on some of my teams that are continuing to do great things and know that, hey, I was a part of that. I had a big role in making that happen. But you go there now and they have no idea who I was or what I did. And that's fine because I have the satisfaction of knowing I had an impact in creating something that was long lasting, that outlived me.
Kyle, thank you for sharing your time and expertise. Folks, be sure to pick up Kyle's book, Sky Less Traveled, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Aaron. Enjoyed it, man.